Hello friends, how are you doing? Today is Tuesday, October 1st, and I am back with another Quiltytube video. If you're brand new to my channel, welcome. My name is Olivia, and this is my YouTube channel, Pumpkin Hollow Quilts. Today's video is going to be about the quilts of Halloween, or at least my quilts of Halloween, basically the ones that I have out this year. These are all quilts that I have made over the past 15 or so years. There's a couple of quilts that as I was getting ready for today's video, I realized that they did not get brought out this year. So that might be a topic for next year to talk about. So always planning ahead. So if you enjoy seeing Halloween quilts, I hope that you will stick around. So before I get into today's video, I want to say a great big thank you to everybody who watched my 2 previous quilt videos. I can't tell you how much it means to me that so many of you guys stopped by to watch both of those videos. The wonderful comments that you guys left, the great feedback, all of it, it just means so very much to me. I definitely am stepping outside of my comfort zone making these videos. Still working out, you know, all of the kinks and everything that come with sort of having a new format. And I just can't tell you how much it means to me that so many of you guys are enjoying the video. So thank you so very much. I plan on, you know, continuing with the videos, at least for now. I have enough content to get me all the way through into the winter. And then I have some plans that I'm trying to sort of work out how I want to do it. Maybe some, you know, quilt with me videos, that kind of thing. So I'm definitely always thinking ahead and thinking about content that I can do to keep these quilt videos coming out every month. If you have any ideas on quilting videos that I can make in the future, please let me know down below. But thank you so very much to all of you guys who watched those first 2 videos. I can't even begin to tell you how much it meant to me. I'm going to kick off today's video by talking about the quilt hanging up behind me. It is called Hocus Pocusville by Crabapple Hill Studios. Many years ago, my grandma and I, we used to do like a variety of shop hops. We would do like 3, 4, 5 a year. There were a lot of shops here in the Willamette Valley. So we would do like the ones to the north, we would do the ones to the south, and then sometimes the north and the south would get together and they would, there would be so many shops that would do it together. So we were going like up into Washington, Portland, Hillsboro, all the way down to Eugene. I mean, we were just like crisscrossing all over the valley, and it was such a blast. So on this particular year, my grandma and I were out in Philomath. There was a quilt shop out there that was one of my favorites. They just had an amazing variety of fabrics. So that particular year, the quilt shop was doing a block of the month. They were only maybe 1 or 2 blocks in, and there were still spots available to join. But unfortunately, my, family was very, young, and money was very tight. So I was unable to join the block of the month, but the shop owner told me that if I waited a year when the block of the month was done, it would be released as a standalone pattern. So I very patiently waited 1 year. And on the next shop hop that was that time of the year, we went to the shop and I purchased the pattern. Now, the funny thing is, I saved up money because I knew that the 9-patch blocks were, we'll say like a scrappy 9-patch, but it's not like a true scrap, just each 9 patch is different. And so I knew I was going to have to get like a little bundle of fabric to be able to complete this part of it. So I saved up, and my grandma and I, we went on a shop hop that was in the spring that year, like late spring that year. And there is a shop in Portland. It was over like in the Clackamas area. They've since moved, but it was over in the Clackamas area. And I remember I walked into the shop, and that was the first time I saw the Civil War tribute quilt. So if you guys have been following me for any length of time, you know that Regina sent me the Civil War tribute quilt. I had talked about it in a video several years ago, talked about how it was a quilt that, you know, I had fallen madly in love with. But when my grandma and I were at this particular shop, it was like, well, you can buy the bundle of fabric for making a quilt with that, or you can buy the fabric for this, but I couldn't do both. So my grandma told me to be responsible. Since I had saved up the money for this quilt, I should purchase this one and then save up and come and get the Civil War tribute. Well, didn't work out that way, because as we all know, fabric lines go out of print, and you know, that was before I really I didn't do a whole lot of internet, that was, you know, that was back. So I ended up missing out, but I did get the fabrics for this one. So that was the more important thing to do. So for me, having not only Hocus Pocusville, but also having the Civil War tribute quilts, which I will show in a future video, I can't even begin to tell you how ecstatically happy it makes me. So this particular quilt, and I realize it's a long story, but there's a lot of life that was lived with this quilt as I not only was making it, collecting the fabrics for it, but there was a whole lot of memories tied up into this quilt. So I felt like it needed to have its own story. For the 9-patch blocks, I used a variety of Civil War reproduction fabrics that I collected during that shop hop. And I also was able to find sort of it wasn't 30s reproduction fabrics. There was a fabric line that came out that had a very vintage 1930s vibe to it, and I was able to find bits and pieces from that as well. So I sort of took those two, that vintage look and that Civil War reproduction look, and squished them together. And the quilt turned out exactly as I had envisioned it, or at least the 9-patch part did. For the accent fabric, I chose a black fabric that has kind of irregular polka dots, and I love it. I can't even begin to tell you how much I love this quilt. It's my favorite. So when I was quilting it on the long arm, in the 9-patch block section, I did free motion pumpkins. And then on the hand embroidery, I did sort of thin clouds. Kind of was going for a spooky look. Also with the hand embroidered blocks, I did personalize them for my husband, my children, myself, and then my grandma is also on there too. So I just changed the names on some of the shops, and just to kind of give it a little bit more of a personal touch. And since it is a quilt that I hope will be passed down through the generations, I'm hoping that it will always be a conversation piece, and whoever has it will be able to tell the next generation who the people in the quilt are. So it was just such a special quilt. I love it. I always look forward to getting it out every year, and I'm always a little sad when I have to put it away. It's my favorite quilt, and I love it. The next one is Costume Maker's Ball, and this one is by J. Wecker Frisch, and I'm pretty sure I butchered her name fabulously. She's of Joyce Studio, and it was for Riley Blake Designs. So this fabric line came out maybe 2018. We went on vacation down to Grants Pass, Oregon, and when we were downtown, it just so happened we stumbled upon a quilt shop. So I went into the quilt shop, and that is where I saw the fabric panel. And I loved the vintage look of the fabric panel. I also loved that it was sewing themed, so I definitely was very intrigued by it. My husband told me to just go ahead and get it. and I purchased it, and this quilt went together so easily. It was, I think I worked on it in an afternoon, and I loved it. It was so much fun to put together. I've had this quilt done for quite a while, and it's quilted. I mean, all it needs is its binding, and it still doesn't have binding on it. Like, I don't even know what happened to the binding fabric, and I don't understand why it is I haven't put the binding on yet. When I quilted the Costume Maker's Ball quilt, I did it in loops that I then went and shadowed. And so it's kind of like a ribbonish motif, even though it's not. I just thought it was kind of a neat way to jazz up the basic loop motif. But I free motion quilted what I will call the ribbon motif, but that's just what I call it. I free motion quilted it all over with that particular motif. And once again, all it needs is its binding. And so I probably should try to find out what I did with the binding fabric, because I have a feeling that I used it for something else. But a lot of fun to make. If you have the kit, you definitely should, get it going, because it was so much fun. And, because I tend to decorate more vintage-ish, this one definitely was right up my alley when I found it. And it just fits right in between Civil War reproduction, hand embroidery, and all the other types of quilts that I make for my style. The next quilt that I have to share today is called Witch's Boot by Crabapple Hill Studio. This was one that I stitched a little over 10 years ago. So some of the fabrics I found during a shop hop, and some of them actually came from this quilt. I collected a ton of fabrics when I was doing Hocus Pocusville that I was able to put them in this quilt and in another one that I'm going to show you. And I still have the remnants of it left. Like, I was able to use it in a variety of quilts for a while. So the background fabrics are all Civil War reproduction. The hand embroidered part of it is embroidered by hand, but before I started to do the hand embroidery, I did color the fabric. So that was something that was kind of new for me. I had done it in a couple of previous quilts, and it was a fun process to do. Basically, you color it with good old Crayola crayon, and then you heat set it. And then after you do all of that, then you stitch it. And it was such a blast to work on. There are some specialty stitches in there as well. For the quilting, I did kind of a variety of different ones. I did swirls. There's kind of like a wavy line. There's loops. I just kind of had fun with this one once I got it to the quilting part of it. And I do have it right here to show, because I feel like I can show it really, I can show it in a video and a photo, but it's kind of easier just to show like the embroidered part of it right here. So again, the back of, like, let's say the witch's boot. So the witch's boot is hand embroidered, but before I started the hand embroidery, I colored the boot with black Crayola crayon, kind of do a lot of shading. So there was a couple of different colors that you use for everything. So the pattern never just had you use one crayon color. It was usually like 2 to 3 that you use to get the correct amount of shading. I know she since moved on to using Prismacolors when doing the coloring, because some of the crayons that she had originally used, they stopped manufacturing. So she then moved on to using colored pencils, which work just as great. And you do the same exact thing where you heat set it. I stitched this with DMC. I do believe that this one, I don't know if it was called for to stitch it with DMC, or if you use Weeks Dye Works, but I use DMC. I kind of looked at what the called for color was, and then I just matched it to what I had in my box at the time. So much fun. I loved it. I remember working on this one all the way up until right before the state fair, because I had planned to put it in, and I kind of finished it right under the wire. I feel like a lot of these quilts, I'm going to start off by saying my grandma and I were on a shop hop. We used to do so many of them. I mean, there were so many shops here in the valley. It wasn't even funny. And in one of the mini shop hops that we did, I came across this next quilt, and I actually have the pattern for it. And it's called Olivia's Quilt, and it was by Witt. So this one, I was actually standing in line getting ready to check out, and I looked down underneath the checkout counter, and she had a bunch of patterns down there. And I saw this one kind of peeking out, and I picked it up and I showed it to my grandma. And we had a bit of a chuckle that it was Olivia's quilt, and she told me that I needed to get it because how often do you come across a quilt that has your name on it? And I sat there like debating about it for a long time, and finally the shop owner told me what any quilter, seasoned quilter will tell you is that, like fabric lines, patterns also sometimes do go out of print. So she told me I needed to get it. So I bought it, and I had this one in my stash for a long time. And then I want to say in 2020, I feel like that's when it started making its appearance on Instagram. The problem is I did not keep good track of any of the quilting that I started doing until like recently. Now, this is one of the quilts that when I decided to work with the fabrics that I love to work with, the Civil War reproductions, this was one of the first-ish quilts that I made. And a lot of the fabrics are the same fabrics that you'll find in Hocus Pocusville. And also they were ones that I had started to pick up as I began building my stash. I love this quilt. It stays out year round. I did do it in more of like the Halloween fall colors because that's what I love, but it does stay out year round. And this one was so much fun to put together. I had an absolute blast making it, and, you know, having it, you know, done made me so very, very happy. So all of the fabrics are Civil War reproduction. With this one, I did a free motion paisley motif. I quilted it very densely because I felt like the dense quilting played very well with all of the blocks. This quilt went together so quickly. I really enjoyed the time working on this one. The purple fabric was some fabric that my friend Retha had given me, and I had just enough to do those triangles on the end, and I still have a little bit left over, and occasionally I will kind of stick it in a quilt somewhere because I like it. It was such a beautiful fabric. But this one, so much fun to make. I have no idea if you can get the pattern anymore. I did do a very quick Google search and I was not able to find it. This next quilt that I have to show is also by Crabapple Hill Studios, and it is called The Mystery of the Salem Witches Quilt Guild. So when this quilt first came out, I had just started doing cross stitching, and I had kind of lost my quilty bug-ish. And I also was kind of burnt out doing hand embroidery. I was definitely ready to move on to doing something else. That's why I started doing cross stitch. And then she released the patterns for this. And I think she did it monthly. She started off with the first row. It went the first row, the second row, the third row, and then there was the fourth, which was the finishing of the quilt. And I had no plans on purchasing the patterns and making this quilt. And I think a friend of mine gave it to me for my birthday that year. And I decided in January that I wanted to go ahead and make the quilt and put it in the state fair that year. So I'm wondering if I started it in November and only got like part of the way through and then kind of abandoned it. And then in January of that year, I made the decision to stitch the whole thing and put it in the state fair that year, because I remember working on it the night before I had to turn it in, and I was still assembling blocks. Like I worked on that all day to get it done. And then I had to go out at night and quilt it and get it quilted and then bind it in the morning. And it was like down to the wire. And yeah, me and my bright ideas sometimes. So the fabrics that I used, the background fabric of all of the hand stitched blocks was by Primitive Gatherings. And unfortunately, I don't know the name of of that particular fabric line. I basically just went online and started picking out fabrics that I thought went together. All of the Halloween fabrics that I used for the piece blocks came from my stash, but the creams I purchased online. So all of the stitching was done on a fabric. It sort of has a vintage look, sort of like a hand dyed look, rusty crusty. I mean, it's cream, but then it's got like splashes of, modeling in it where it's like a dark cream, light cream. I thought maybe it gave it kind of like that spooky vintage vibe. So what I did was you cut the panels out, you trace the design onto the panel. It was at this point that I believe that she was using Prismacolors. So I was able to use Prismacolors that my daughter actually had. So they're colored pencils, and I was able to use those. Once I had it colored, then I did hand embroider. I did do it in a back stitch. And this one had a lot of colors that I had to pull for it. And they were also colors by DMC. So I think she had changed over to Cosmo threads, but to get the Cosmo thread bundle, it was really expensive, and some of it was really hard to get from the manufacturer. So I just decided to go ahead and use the DMC that I had already in my stash. So once all of the blocks were hand stitched, then I began working on the pieced blocks. In some of those piece blocks, there was a little bit of hand embroidery. There were 3 flowers that are Dresden, I can never say that, Dresden plate. And so you had to make that. And then inside of it, each one had a little bit of hand embroidery that you did. So it wasn't just hand embroidered in the middle, it was also carried out into the pieced border around it. So it was a lot of fun to make. I had started cross stitching, and I kind of set my cross stitching aside to do this one. This was the last hand embroidered quilt that I've made. And it was sort of like my swan song, even though I know I'll go back to hand embroidery at some point. This one was sort of like the last one that I did, and it was a lot of fun. And then I went back, I took up cross stitching where I left off. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. And this quilt is still very much available. There's also, she's done other quilts with the same Salem Witches Quilt Guild theme. I think there's a glamping theme that she did, and then there's like other ones that she did too. And so she kind of carried on that theme, and that was really, really cool. So there's a little bit of personalizing ish, not very much, but there's a little bit. But it was a fun quilt to make, and I do enjoy getting it out every year and looking at it and having it out. And this one, I think my son has claimed. So when the time comes for me to pass it along, it'll go to my son, and hopefully his future wife will like it too. The next quilt I have to share today is a table topper called Pumpkin Patch by Timeless Traditions. So when I purchased this, I had purchased it as a kit from the designer. I did go look on her website, and she does still have the pattern available, but I could not find the kit. This one, I think I did put it together either in 2020 or 21, and I love it. So these are all of my favorite colors, my favorite look. Everything about this is me. And it was a lot of fun to put together. Definitely did it kind of over a weekend or during the week. I can't remember, but I just remember putting it together, and it went together super fast, and it was so much fun. And this one I kind of move around every year. This year it's over across the room on the side table, and it has my Winds of Autumn cross stitch piece sitting on top of it. I love it. The two of them look so great together. And so every year I really love getting this one out and having it. I do leave it out through Thanksgiving. When I am making quilts, I do make ones that, are specifically like Halloween themed, but when I can, I try to do it so that I can have it out all autumn long. And so this is one that I get to keep out all through the season, I love it. So I will put a link to Timeless Traditions website to the pattern if you're interested. And the last quilt that I have to share and show today, this is one that I don't have the name for. Back in whatever year it was that I created this quilt, it was done as a group. So I belonged to a quilt group many years ago, and it kind of just it's the quilt group is still, I think, is still active, but a lot of the original members have left, and I ended up deciding not to. COVID kind of killed it a little bit, I feel like, because after that it was really hard to get people to get together. I mean, everybody kind of went and either moved or did their own thing, but it had been a very active group, and at least once a year we would do some sort of a project. And so this one particular year, uh, there was this mystery quilt, we'll call it. There is an actual pattern for it. It comes out of one of the nickel books. I just don't know which one. And I ended up having to finish mine a little bit differently because the person who was running the mystery quilt did not give all the information. And so when all of the blocks were assembled, it was like, well, what do we do now? There should be another part, and she never gave us the part. And so I just ended up going ahead and finishing the quilt how you see it. So this particular quilt is done out of, once again, Civil War reproduction fabrics and sort of those vintage looking fabrics that I had picked up while making Hocus Pocusville. I had a lot of fabric left over, believe me. And so it worked out really, really well. I also had other bits of fabric that I had picked up in the years since I finished Hocus Pocusville that I was able to put into this quilt. The sashing fabric, my friend who lived in Hawaii at the time sent it to me. She knew that we were all working on the quilt, but she knew I was doing mine as a Halloween theme, and so she had saw this vintage pumpkin looking fabric, and so she sent it to me. So of course I had to use it in the quilt. So I used it as all of the sashing fabrics. The outside pieced border was done out of fabrics that were left, or pieces that were left over as I made the quilt. So as you were, making like the different half square triangles that went into it, I think I used the leftover bits. I don't think this is one that was part of the pattern. I don't remember. I'm not really sure. It was long enough ago that I just don't really remember. But I do remember assembling that outside border using the leftover bits of the fabrics that I had cut off the other blocks. Maybe it was something that you were supposed to do for the original part of the mystery. I don't remember. It's been way too many years ago now, but I wish I remembered better. I didn't keep track of anything back then, so I just don't remember. All I know about it is I used leftover fabrics from Hocus Pocusville. I put them into this quilt. I used the sashing fabric that I had got from my friend, and then the black border that goes around the outside I had used from another quilt that I had made that year. I had just enough left over. So it was a lot of fun to put together. It was a great group project. A lot of us participated that year. I, of course, was the only one that did it as a Halloween themed. At that time, I was the only one in my quilt group that, loved Halloween and actively made stuff Halloweenish. And then my friend joined the group, and she also is a huge Halloween lover. So, but I always had to make something that was Halloween themed every year. I also did put this quilt into the state fair, whatever year that was, that I finished it. And I remember because, again, people could go around voting for their favorites. And there was a lady who had left me a note telling me that this particular quilt reminded her of her childhood, that the moment she saw it, it just took her back to when she was a little girl. And I thought that was so sweet because that is, I mean, that was the highest compliment when somebody comes along and they see your vision for the quilt and they just nail it. And for me, when I look at it, I just saw Halloween in the, you know, the 20s, the 30s, 40s, 50s, into the 60s. I mean, that's that type of vintage look I was going for. So the fact that I nailed it made me super, super happy. So this quilt also ended up going to school with Allison a couple of different times during the Halloween season. So she had it on her bed at school. We've also used this quilt like during Ice-Mageddon when we had no power, water. It was freezing cold. This one ended up on a bed. It's definitely lived a lot of its life since I have made it. For the quilting, I did do an all over free motion pumpkin motif similar to the one that I used in the middle of Hocus Pocusville. I have used that on a couple of different quilts. I just like it. You can make the quilts be kind of, or the motif kind of be as funky as you want. And so I've used it on many of them. So again, I sort of took the Civil War reproduction fabric and that vintage style fabric line that had come out, and I sort of mashed them together to create the look. And I love it. I always enjoy getting this one out every year. I've had it, well, currently it's hanging on a ladder, and I'll insert photos of the end of where the quilts are kept during October. But this one has, you know, been on the back of the couch. Yeah, definitely a lot of life with this one. And it's one that Allison has also claimed for herself when I pass on or decide to pass them on. Well, friends, that brings me to the end of today's video. I had an absolute blast creating today's video. I love having the Halloween quilts out and being able to talk about them. Halloween is my favorite time of the year. I look forward to it all year long. And when it finally arrives, I'm just like in my happy place. So being able to talk about the Halloween quilts just, it made me so very happy today. I do plan on being back the beginning of November. So what I did, so right now, all around the house, I have Halloween and autumn quilts kind of mixed together. And for today's video, I decided to split them apart so that way in my next video, I can show and share the autumn quilt. So I'll be able to talk about the Lancaster Friendship quilt that I made several years ago. I kind of crashed two of my friends who were doing it, I crashed and joined them. So I get to talk about that quilt. And then I also have there's a wall hanging across the way that I get to talk about, and there's a quilt that I'm currently working on now that I hope to have done so that way I can show and share it in that video. So again, that will be another fun one to make, and there will be another quilt hanging up behind me. So I'm really looking forward to creating that November video. But I do hope that you, if you stuck around, I hope you enjoyed today's video. All of the quilts that I have shown and shared in today's video will be listed down below in the description box. If you would like to see what I am up to in between my videos, you can follow me on Instagram. I am Pumpkin Hollow Quilts, and I do have a Facebook page called Pumpkin Hollow Quilting, and I will put a link to those down below as well. Thank you so very much for hanging out with me today, and I will see you next month. Bye-bye.